I think we can start now. Yeah, Speaker Pelosi, I'm Sarah Wan. I'm the Executive Director of Community Youth Center, and I'm also the co-chair of the API Council. And I would also like to welcome everyone from our council to our annual API Council Roundtable. In the time since our last convening, API Council has grown to 57 nonprofits and CBO now. Our work collectively in recent years has been instrumental in advocating and serving our community in so many ways. On the heels of completing our census efforts and in the midst of pivoting our services and programming to best meet the needs of those affected by COVID, we all have had much to do in our respective communities. Our work in the depths of the pandemic was sometimes our clients' only human interaction every week as they await their grocery delivery, every day as they await for their meals delivery. We provided the necessary updated information our community needed in language when they did not know where to turn. And in the wake of violence that have plagued our city, we have been the fierce advocates and allies to secure wraparound services. So in many ways, this annual convening for our API Council members with our esteemed Speaker Pelosi is a celebration of all we have done and continue to do. And much of this work, by the way, going on behind the scenes with very little fanfare and no press coverage. But we all know too well the importance of our advocacy on behalf of those we serve, whether it be addressing food insecurity or hosting youth programs, violence intervention, or funds for victims or survivors. We know that these services are a matter of life or death for many. So as we continue this work, know that you have your colleagues at API Council to lean on and ask for support. And today, we truly look forward to a productive conversation, and I thank everyone again for coming. And it's my great pleasure to pass it on to our API Council Director, Callie.
Thank you, Sarah, for your welcoming remarks, and thank you to our members who have joined us today. I would like to introduce today's panel with our steering committee members. Sarah, that you just met, Dean Ito Taylor from API Legal Outreach, Annie Chung, Self-Help for the Elderly, John Osaki, Japanese Community Youth Center, Malcolm Young, Chinatown Community Development Center, Eddie On, Brightline Defense Project, Luisa Antonio, Baihan Equity Center, and our moderator for today, Gordon Chin. This year's roundtable is convened under extraordinary circumstances. Not only are we still recovering from a pandemic that has shifted our very way of life, we also still recover every day from the verbal, physical, and emotional traumas undergone by our community. In the past year, we have shouldered so much, and there's no doubt that there is so much we must continue to do. And indeed, within these ranks as a council, we are the very community leaders who are driving a national movement. And our next guest has consistently been our partner in advocacy and has a track record of leadership herself. For over 3 decades, Speaker Nancy Pelosi has championed California's 12th district. Now in our 3rd term as Speaker, the work ahead, not just for our city, but this nation, has proven challenging in the wake of our former president. In Speaker Pelosi, we've had an ally to denounce the very divisive and racist language that has punctured this era of turmoil. We've had a representative in the Capitol to demand that issues of everyday Americans are prioritized. Issues like food insecurity, housing insecurity, immigration, healthcare, access to affordable education, and access to jobs. These are the same issues that our community faces every day. And we continue to be grateful for having a champion to uplift these issues. Welcome, Speaker Pelosi.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Callie. Thank you. And thanks, Sarah, for bringing us together today. I feel very at home with so many of you because we've worked together, Annie Chung, for decades. Gordon Chin, it seems like forever. And it's wonderful that you'll be leading our conversation today, Gordon. But to each and every one of you, thank you for your service to the community. As I say of San Francisco, the beauty is in the mix. I always say to my colleagues, I feel sorry for you because you do not have the vibrant AAPI community that I have in San Francisco and in the Bay Area and in our great state of California that makes us so special. We come, as Callie mentioned, an array of concerns that have brought us together, challenges that we have faced over time, little did we know we would be facing what we have now because of what has happened over the past year and how certain person in our country has characterized a pandemic unfairly and unnecessarily and dangerously. So this is a special time. Usually we meet in May, and hopefully we will again in May. But I thought it was important for us to meet even sooner so we can share some ideas about what's happening in Congress in terms of AAPI assaults on the community, which are assaults on our democracy. This is not just about the AAPI community, as significant as that is, but it challenges our conscience. It pushes us back to think that this would happen in our country. I'm so proud of Joe Biden, who really, within 24 hours of his inauguration, was speaking out against this, giving direction to the Justice Department, even before we had an Attorney General, as to what a priority this would be. I'm proud of our members of Congress, Judy Chu, the chair of our Congressional Asian Pacific Islander, American Islander community, and Grace Meng and Doris Matsui, the list goes on. I was telling my staff earlier that I have a weekly meeting, it's called Crescendo, and it is the heads of each of the caucuses in the Congress. So it's not many, it's like about 9 people. And of that 9 people, 5 of them are, well, it's, you be the judge. It's Judy Chu, obviously, KPAC. It's Pramila Jayapal, head of the Progressive Caucus. It's Mark Takano, head of the Equality Conference. It's Stephanie Murphy, the head of the Blue Dome. It's Ted Lieu, the head of the message group that we have that is part of that discussion. And like 3 other of us, I, of course, consider myself part of the community since I represent one of the most blessed ones in the country. But so this subject has been in the forefront every day and certainly every week when we have the meeting to take a tally of how far we've come or how far we have to go on this subject. Again, in the course of all of this, we've had the rescue package, which, knowing of the entrepreneurial spirit in the AAPI community, the small business initiatives, very important. We passed the Violence Against Women Act, and the president has funding for that, which I know is important to the community and interacts with the, and I was very proud of our Senator Dianne Feinstein about almost 2 weeks ago, not this past Friday, but the one before, after what happened in Georgia. She came forth. She had been sort of a traditional supporter of the filibuster, but after Georgia, she came forward and she said, this is about what my public service is about, the AAPI community, gun violence, violence against women. And so I think that we should make an adjustment to the Filibuster Act so that we can get gun safety and these other initiatives passed, which go to the heart of our Constitution, the heart of our nation. So I was very proud of her that she opened up to that, because that's a path, even to HR 1, cleaner government, to stop them from all the voter suppression that they're trying to do. So we're very proud of working with the president. The rescue package, it basically is our HEROES Act that we passed last May. We passed some of it in December, the rest of it in the rescue package, except enriched, invigorated with the vaccine. We didn't have a vaccine last May. We didn't have a Democratic president. We had a president then who would not let us address in any of the legislation in an important way the disparities that existed in our healthcare system and in how we addressed the pandemic. In fact, he was inflaming the pandemic issue, but he's gone, forget him. Right now, we're going forward with what we have to do, not only in the rescue, but in the recovery, which the president just spoke to. I don't know if you saw it, but it's an I say it's in a tradition of America. It's a big plan. It's transformational. It involves everyone, that everyone can participate, and it recognizes that we are parts of families. that if we're going to have people in the workplace, we have to make sure the home front is safe for them, whether it's children or older parent or person with disability or something, that there has to be a recognition of the role that home health care or home care persons play. It recognizes, we'll have another bill after this one. In 2 weeks, he'll make another announcement about childcare and education, all of that are about the human infrastructure. So we're in a good place, but we're not in a good place unless we stop the hate crime. Now, what we talk about, we have the COVID hate crimes bill that Grace Mang is putting forth. We're proud of her work, as I've said. Also, Tammy Duckworth and Mazie Hirano have been very important in all this. But Doris Matsui just moves all of our hearts telling the story that she was born in a camp. Well, thousands and thousands and thousands of Asian Americans were fighting the war to protect the freedoms in our country that their people didn't even have because they were taken to camps. That's where she was born, tells that story. So in Congress, we have a very active and proud AAPI group of members who are in leadership in every way and respect it in every way. But again, in everything we've been doing on COVID, whether it's small business, whether it's access to testing, tracing, treating, whether it's access to vaccines, we wanted it all to be in a way that had equity about it. I really would like to hear what you all have to say, because it's been a pretty eventful time with a lot of legislation out there that relates to immigration, healthcare, jobs, small business, and the rest. So I'm talking with great pride about our AAPI members and the President of the United States, and even a Vice President, Asian American Vice President of the United States. Pretty exciting time. Gordon, I know you're going to lead the way for us, as you have done for me for decades now, my dear friend. He has been a hero in housing and so many other issues. And I said of Annie, when did I meet you? Like in the 70s or something like that? You were a little girl, but now here you are. Now here we are. Self-help for the elderly. So thank you all very much for the opportunity for me to hear from you and share some of the source of pride that I have in our AAPI. Let me just say this one more thing, because I've taken their, when I went to Chinatown right at the beginning of this, and they said I was dancing in the streets and this and that. No, I was just paying my respects. And I knew that there was any community that was going to take this seriously and be a model to the rest of the country, it would be our AAPI community in San Francisco, at the same time as the president was trying to point fingers aside, blame, and all the rest of that. But over and over and over again, the press has said that wasn't true. What he said, that wasn't about dancing in the streets because there was a pandemic. It was paying respects because of a history of respect that I have for the community. With that, I thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts, but I want to hear yours, so I will yield back.
Thank you, Nancy. Let me add my thanks for you, your leadership for our community, our city, indeed our country. And I am honored again to moderate this panel. There's no shortage of questions that our members have come up with, but the four in particular that we thought were particularly important. So we're going to kick it off with Dean Ito Taylor to ask about the COVID-19 hate act that you referenced earlier. Dean?
Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for your years of leadership and commitment to racial and social justice, not only for APIs, but all communities of color. You are a rare and essential ally of all of our communities, especially in the Bay Area. And I wanted to mention that, a lot of your co-representatives have no idea what it's like to have an Asian community in their districts. And yet we have folks throughout the country that are fearful from this violence, and they have no allies locally. So we hope that you can carry that message that the API community in America is not invisible. We're in every state, and our concerns need to be taken to the highest level of priorities, even if we don't make up a huge percentage of the electorate. So we'd like to ask you for maybe a status update on the COVID-19 Hate Act that Maisie and Representative Meng are kind of championing. Apparently, this will lead to multilingual access to helplines, or perhaps the Department of Justice being involved with local crimes. Could you give us your take on that?
Well, thank you. Thank you for your kind words and the recognition that I'm very blessed, but not everyone is so blessed. They are, the community exists there. They just don't realize it as fully as they should, or choose to recognize it. So here's the thing: on the COVID-19 Hate Act, sponsored by Senator Mazie Hirono and Congresswoman Grace Meng. Grace Meng is a leader in the Congress. She's the chair of one of our committees that determines how we function there. She just presented a few days ago about some things. So she commands a great deal of respect. When she speaks, people listen. She almost cried, though, when we had the hearing last week. I mean, I don't even want to talk about it, because I don't want you to even be aware of how ridiculous some of the members are and how oblivious they are to a sense of decency about what America is and how blessed we are with our AAPI community. Okay, so we go back April 12th. We go back on April 14th. The Judiciary Committee will mark up the bill, the COVID-19 Hate Act. It will come to the floor in May. This is pretty fast for legislation when we have a whole backlog of things that we need to do regarding the pandemic and the rest, but we're giving it priority and moving it forward. The recognition that, even just since March 2022, in that year, it's over 3,000. It's almost like 10 hate crimes a day against the AAPI community that we know about. It may be much more. Judy Chu, Maisie, and Tammy Duckworth, as well as Grace, have been in the lead on making sure that everybody is fully attuned to what is happening. As I've said before, though, we are very pleased that on the first day of office, the president condemned attacks and marshaled federal resources to combat them. The Attorney General shall explore opportunities to support, consistent with applicable laws, the efforts of state and local agencies, as well as AAPI communities and community-based organizations to prevent discrimination, bullying, harassment, and hate crimes against AAPI individuals, and to expand the collection of data. Now, that's really important. Let me just tell you from my experience on hate crimes in general, whether it's against LGBTQ or AAPI or whatever. What is important is that we can document what happened. And what I said to my colleagues, in my beautiful experience for me to be in Chinatown, the rest, some of the older people my age, they get assaulted, but they're not familiar, nor would I be, even if I were not, my first language were not Chinese. They don't get the language these crude people are using. Somebody has to write it down. So it is a testimony to the fact that this was a hate crime. It wasn't just, I want to steal her purse, or I don't like this, or this or that. It's a hate crime. So again, a lot of it is language, because, and when I say language, I don't mean Chinese to English or Tagalog to English or anything like that. I'm just talking about generational. What does that mean, what he said or something? So to the extent that if somebody sees something like this, they must listen at the same time what the person says. You don't belong here, go back to where you belong, all that really vile stuff. But if we can have that, that helps us to collect the data. And again, we have to, shall we say, I've always been frustrated with how you have to have that evidence when it's so clearly self-evident. But in any event, April 14th for the markup, May for the legislation, and we want to give it a big, awareness as far as the public is concerned. You better not think about doing this. Isn't it a shame? Isn't it a shame?
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank
We'll
you.
be there. Madam Speaker, our next question is from Malcolm Young of the Chinatown Community Development Center, and he wants to ask about affordable housing. Malcolm?
Well, first of all, thank you again for spending this time with us, Madam Speaker. Unlike Gordon, I'm not allowed to call you Nancy, so we'll stick with Madam Speaker.
You can
But
say,
I haven't. Oh, we haven't earned that right yet.
if you call me Nancy, I'll call you Malcolm. I'll do that.
Well, in that case, Nancy, I also just wanted to thank you again for coming to Chinatown last year. It was a show of respect. We felt that respect, and I just want to deeply, deeply thank you for that. And along with Annie and maybe a couple of others here, we had the privilege of walking Chinatown with you, and the community felt that. So thank you so much.
Don't forget our delicious lunch.
That's right, at Dim Sum Corner. That was very good.
The walk.
And that's right, and they're still there. So they're still there. They're still open. They're still trying to survive. So we encourage anybody and everybody to come visit Chinatown, just like you did last year. So thank you so much.
I can't wait to come back. I can't wait to come back.
In terms of affordable housing, this is an issue that's been critical for the API community for really as long as any of us can remember. Places like Chinatown are surrounded by areas that are wealthier and which has always been a threat to take over Chinatown and convert it into something that doesn't resemble the community we have. And so affordable housing, the residential component of Chinatown, is something that we've always paid very close attention to. Coming out of the last recession, we saw that the recovery was uneven in many ways, and housing impact in particular was uneven. In San Francisco, unfortunately, it led to a significant amount of displacement and pain, frankly, for our tenants across the city, but particularly low-income seniors, immigrants, and people of color. So affordable housing and affordability is something that I know that we're eager to keep an eye on coming out of this recession, which I'm optimistic that we're going to. So my question around this, and it may have in part been answered earlier today, but I'm going to pose it anyway. What is Congress and the White House doing to advance fair and affordable housing? And I think the second part is really critical as well, and to stop evictions both in San Francisco and across the United States.
Well, thank you, Malcolm, for your question. You have on this call a real hero on housing, affordable housing in our country, Gordon Chin. I've seen him recognized nationally in Washington, D.C., locally, and personally in every way. So he's our leader and a go-to person on this subject. Currently, and correct me, Gordon, elaborate further, if you would. In the I keep saying recovery, but the recovery's next. In the rescue plan, we had $27.5 billion in rental assistance. This is the work of Maxine Waters, the chair of the Financial Services Committee, and as Gordon knows, it's financial services, banking, housing, and urban development. So housing, important part of that. And then homeowner assistance, $10 billion to states, territories, and tribes to try to help some of the homeowners, because sometimes the renter is, it's like 2 or 3 unit place, but if the renter can't pay, then the owner can't pay the bank. So it has a couple of different ways to be helpful. President himself, though, has extended the eviction moratorium to the end of June. So that's an improvement. So this gives this system a chance to work. There's also $5 billion for homeless and other things. But that is the rescue. And the rescue was coronavirus centric. And so we need to do much more than that. So in our next plan, which is what the president announced today, it has a lot in it. But among those things is that housing, when we talk about infrastructure, people think roads, bridges, mass transit, but this is about infrastructure, water, broadband, housing, education. And the housing piece would probably be twofold. One, affordable housing and public housing. Public housing is an important part of it. Some public housing needs to be rehabbed, some of it needs to be replaced, but also making the stock of good housing, whether it's public or affordable, that will be part of that legislation. And Maxine has that as a very high priority in terms of how to do it. But the president has it as a priority in his proposal as well. I worked with Gordon because when I first went to Congress, one of the first committee assignment I had was the Housing Committee, because this has always been a challenge for San Francisco. We have the very wealthy and we have the need for affordable stock, and we don't need the gentrification to accommodate the haves to undermine the beautiful diversity of our community. So let's stay in close touch on that to make sure that as they, some of the money will go to states, to localities, to community-based organizations. Let's make sure it reaches how we need it to reach to sustain the beautiful diversity of our communities.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Our next question will come from Annie Chung about immigration. Annie?
Hi, Annie.
Annie, you mute.
I thought that it was automatic. Sorry. Nancy, really thank you for this opportunity for us to express to you what are some of the challenges and priorities that our community are facing. On the area of immigration, we see a lot of positive, really, signs ever since President Biden stepped in. There were some really mean regulations that the former administration was trying to pass, but I think that one by one, they've kind of been rescinded or addressed. So thank you very much for your advocacy on that. But can you share with us a little bit more details about President Biden's comprehensive immigration reform? Because we hear something about it, but we're not sure what the timeline is. And I know that Congress is working on legislations regarding our DACA program, our Dreamers program, and also the temporary protected service, right? The DPS and the enforced departures. All those legislations are really important to the AAPI community. So we'd like to learn a little bit more, and how can we help? Yeah.
Thank you, Annie, for your service in so many ways. It's self-help for the elderly, whether it's healthcare or any subject that relates to them, and this important issue of immigration. I remember when we were sitting on the floor crying when they passed the, what was that thing, so-called welfare reform bill that was so damaging to many of the people that we were trying to help, on top of some of the immigration chatter. It's heartbreaking to see how public policy, which supposedly has a big vision, but has a terrible impact on individuals. So in this bill, well, first of all, thank you for acknowledging that we're trying to do the DREAM Act and for the DACA and the Dreamers, even more than DACA, and then the temporary protected status. We passed that legislation in the House a couple of weeks ago. And we also passed the Farm Worker Modernization Act, which is important in California in terms of farm workers and the rest, but across the country. It's interesting to note, I didn't know this until recently. I did stand on the floor for over 8 hours speaking about the Dreamers Act. It was the longest speech in the history of the Congress. It wasn't really a speech. People were handing me stories of Dreamers in their districts, and then it was coming over for the Senate, so I just could be telling stories. But the minute you give up the floor, it's over. So you can't give up the floor. So that's what that was. But anyway, just to say what a priority that is for our Congress and as obviously for me as speaker. I didn't know until recently, though, that the first applicants for DACA were Korean Americans, were Koreans. So what we do know is that the Dreamers are represent the beautiful diversity of our country. People think of them mostly from Latin America, but from Africa, from Asia. You know the beautiful diversity of the AAPI community, and that is reflected in many of the Dreamers as well in our country. So we're hoping that we can pass that in the Senate, and I'll go to that in a moment, as well as the farm worker one. That has strong Republican support. We got 8 or 9 votes for the Dreamers in the House. These people are not necessarily sharing our values all the way. We can only get 8 or 9 to vote for that. On the comprehensive bill, this is a bigger deal. While if we could pass Dreamers and workforce and TPS, the temporary protected status that you mentioned, and put them on a path of citizenship, it's millions of people. It's millions of people. It's more than half of those who are not fully documented in the country now. So we're hoping we can get that done. But at the same time, everybody knows we have to have comprehensive immigration reform. It's possible. There was a bipartisan bill in the Senate a few years ago, but we were not in control in the House, and the Republican speaker would not bring it to the floor. We're not bringing it to the floor. So again, we want to try to get to that bipartisan place. And here's what it does that is of special interest in a fight that we always make for the community. And it has a path to citizenship to help nearly 4 million people who have approved sponsored petitions who are waiting for a visa, some up to 20 years, many in the AAPI community. It includes the family-based immigration, clears backlogs, recaptures unused visas. This eliminates long wait lines, increased per country visa caps, eliminates the 10-year bar, allows immigration with approved family-sponsored petition to join family in the U.S. temporarily with work authorization while waiting for the green card, and embraces diversity and all this. But as you know, one of the big priorities for the AAPI community was family unification. And that is something that we think has to be in the comprehensive immigration reform. So let's stay in touch. I know, as I've said to my colleagues, I've learned more from the Chinese American community about naturalization because you've been our teachers and our mentors on that subject, and now to the entire AAPI community. So thank you for your leadership there. We think we should be able to get the other 2 passed in the Senate. Again, we're talking about the filibuster. If we could get some relaxation about the filibuster, then we think, now we're trying to sneak some of it, we're trying to prioritize some of this in a reconciliation bill. But I call her, with respect, but nonetheless, in shorthand, the bird lady. I don't know what she says about that, but we think we can make a case about the budget implications of immigration in our country, and we were going to try to do that. But absent that, now let me just tell you this. Don't say I said this. This is just for us. Okay. In 2000, for some reason, over time, it's come to you need 60 votes. Without going into that whole history, you need 60 votes. In 2013, the Democrats, under a Democratic president, changed it to 51 votes for the president's nominations to the cabinet and some judgeships, not the Supreme Court. They made it 51. In 2017, the Republican president, who shall remain nameless, and the Republican Senate, who shall remain in the minority, they changed it to include the Supreme Court. And that's why we have the court we had. 52 votes, that's what they had, 52 Republicans. They didn't have 60 votes to put that court in place. So we think that if it only takes 51 or 52 to name a Supreme Court justice, it should only take 51 or 52 to have a path to citizenship for 11 million people in our country. And that's our fight. What is
Thank
it?
you, Nancy. And we back your play 100%. And our next question will come from Luisa Antonio from Binding Equity Center. And she wants to talk about childcare. Luisa?
Hi, Luisa. Where's Luisa?
Luisa?
There.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much for having this discussion, and thank you so much for being a staunch supporter of the API community. And for specifically for the Filipino community, I'm glad you mentioned about, the path to citizenship, family reunification, which includes the Filipino World War II veterans family reunification in that particular legislation. And we are very pleased, and having you as a champion there, we feel great about that. And we've been relying on you since the 90s about the Filipino veterans equity, and you're still there for us, and we do appreciate it. My question is, the American Rescue Plan provided critical funding through the Child Care Stabilization Fund and increases to CCDBG allocations. We know that this one-time lift must be permanent. Is this type of investment likely to continue or be rolled back to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, thank you, Lisa, for your work in this regard. And yeah, we've been trying a long time to have justice for our Filipino vets. As you probably recall, my college roommate was Filipina. She was from the Philippines. So constantly reminding me about that subject. Amelia Lourdes Benitez was her name. Amy Lou, we called her Amy Lou. And she's back home in the Philippines for now decades, but she did visit me in the speaker's office. Let me just say this, in terms of the child care issue, thank you for that. In our bill that we passed in the summer, which is Moving America Forward, we had $200 billion for child care. This bill has about $45 billion. It is a 39 for child care, a few billion for a Head Start, and then maybe like one, and then another 5 for another kind of child care program. But that, as you say, that's COVID-centric. For us to have what we need for childcare in America, for it to be transformative, we really must do much more. And as I say, in the summer, at the end of June, beginning of July, we had a $200 billion plan, separate from COVID-centric. And we had in the rescue, as you know, the $45 billion. The president in the next iteration of recovery has $25 billion more in the infrastructure bill. And I think we just keep growing that. Two things that I think have to happen in a major way that are, shall we say, central to people's lives, but not always on the top big money things in bills. One is childcare. This is everything. This enables women and men to be in the workforce, whether it's a child or a senior you're caring for. It's family care of one form or another. And mental health, especially after the COVID. We have to think in a bigger way about mental health. And those two things we're trying to say really need a bigger commitment of resources, and that being financial and otherwise, and listening to the community-based organizations that are delivering those kinds of services so that we can allocate the money where there's the absorptive capacity to get the job done. But thank you for your leadership on that. So again, for our members, this is like fighting words. Childcare. Let me add them. You know, everybody talks about any subject. Women in the workplace, women in the academic world, women in government. You have to have childcare, and you have to know if I'm going to hire somebody. Say I'm a guy and I'm going to hire somebody. I want to know that that person, man or woman, is fully at work when they're at work and they're not thinking, oh my God, I don't even trust the childcare that my child is in. You know, it has to be that level of quality and trust so that women, largely women, can take their full place in our economy, in our country, and be providers for their families, amassing the resources they need for their retirement, meeting the needs of their families multi-generationally.
Thank you, Nancy. I think we have time to slip in one more quick question, and this is from John Osaki. John?
Hi, John. See, John.
Hello, Speaker Pelosi. So I wanted to say that this is my 25th year as executive director, and I've never called you Nancy. So I'm going to consider myself part of the club that's graduated, be the very special club to be able to call you Nancy. But thank you very much for joining us here today. And, you know, what I wanted to ask about is, you know, an article came out in Time Magazine yesterday about why the children of this country are not taught Asian American history, and specifically about why they are not taught about the racism that Asian American communities have experienced. And, you know, you might recall that in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act that provided reparations for my mother and father, who were both incarcerated during the war, also had an education fund. And that education fund was unfortunately dramatically underfunded by the time allocations were made. And today we have the Japanese American Confinement Site Program, which is providing, you know, really critical education about the Japanese American incarceration. And I think the federal government has a really important role to play in educating this country and the American public about the Asian American community, about the racism that we've experienced, not just for the Japanese American community, but for all Asian American communities. So I would certainly like to see programs like the Japanese American Confinement Site Program elevated in profile, provided more resources, and for other communities to have programs similar where they can develop educational projects and ways to inform the American public about all the different experiences of Asian American communities in this country. So that is something, obviously, because of your longtime support of our community, your familiarity with all of us, you know, that is something that we would certainly very much appreciate you, you know, taking a leadership role and making sure that the federal government takes responsibility for making sure that this country is educated about not only our contributions to, you know, American society, but, you know, really all the past harm and racism that we've faced as communities.
Well, thank you, John, for that question. Let me just say that it's always interesting to me when we talk about the greatness of America. We say Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, he built the Transcontinental Railroad. No, he didn't. Chinese Americans built the Transcontinental Railroad. So let's make sure that that contribution, and as you look at the pictures of actually the people who did the job, you got like 7 white guys standing there slightly acknowledging who really built the railroad. And when I say built, I'm not just talking about the physical labor, which would be significant enough, but the intellectual resource that it took to build and have it come together where it was supposed to come together. So that'd be one thing. But in terms of the reparations arrest, I happened to be in Congress and voted for that legislation. And education was supposed to be an important part of that. And I think now, well, I think we're embarrassed. I think America's embarrassed by what happened during World War II. As I said earlier, Doris Matsui talked about being born in a camp. And we know that while people were being sent to camps, tens of thousands of Asian American AAPI were fighting the war for our country, a country's freedom that was being deprived to their own families and relatives in the United States. So I think we've grown up a bit, and that there should be more facing the reality of our history at that time. And so Doris, well, of course, I served with Bob Matsui, who also was born there. Minetta, you know, we've had a rich history serving with them at the time of that legislation. Doris has, Congresswoman Matsui has a bill to reauthorize the funds and add a new $2 million a year grant fund. And it's included in my own appropriations request for that money. Now, in terms of the National Park Service, I mean, this is an interpretation that is so valuable to the American people. And I think that they are ready to embrace a fuller embrace of showing off the camps. They look all nice and neat, of course. And so people are like, well, that looks good. No, it isn't good. They were incarcerated. It isn't good not to have your freedom, no matter how nice and neat people kept it. So we have to make sure that the injustice that was so much a part of that is very much a part of the interpretation that goes forward, and I'm sure that it will. But rest assured that with Doris there and Mark Takano and others that strictly Japanese, but the others who are AAPI sharing that value, we've done that with Native Americans. Have we really corrected the record there? We've done it with the African American community in so many ways. What happened with the shall we say, discoverers of America and what that meant to Native Americans and the rest. We really haven't faced up to where we are as a nation. Last year, now it's a year and a half ago, because COVID's almost not counting as a year. I took a delegation to Ghana, where we saw the place 400 years ago, where the first death ships took Africans as slaves to America. The brutality of it all is beyond what you could imagine. I mean, there were dungeons and treated worse than animals, and upstairs they were in church praying. Really? What's the hypocrisy of that? The Europeans, they were praying. These are God's children that you are mistreating, and you're upstairs praying like you're some kind of a good person. So, and that to me was the beginning of a very important part of American history. It started in Africa. I think even those who were involved in the 40s knew that this was wrong, but we just have to teach the American people so that nothing like that ever happens again. And sadly, this COVID hate thing brings back that terrible memory. So you're absolutely right, John. Let's stay in touch on that. It'll be good. Now, my doctor, Dr. Hayashi, I went to the grandfather, the son, and now I go to the grandson, dentist. Every time I went to the dentist, when I came to San Francisco a long time ago, long before I was in Congress, I'd open my mouth and hear about how we had to get the reparations. I was captive audience. And so every time I spoke about it on the floor, I clearly remember Dr. Hayashi and telling me how awful it was. He must have known that one day this mother of five who's in here is going to go to Congress, because he was definitely convinced that I had to leave the office every time fully aware of what the injustice was and what the possibilities were. And that's a real tribute to the Japanese American community and those who you were able to attract to the cause in the community. I know so many people who were active Democrats, but they relinquished all of that to work on the reparations side of things. So again, thank you for making America more American by facing up to what we are and what we did and what we should be doing better, and making sure that our children know the story.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Nancy. To close it out for us this morning is Steering Committee member Eddie On. Eddie?
Eddie? Hi, Eddie.
Oh, Speaker Pelosi, and thank you again for your leadership on these issues. I think it's just really passing the microphone, the virtual microphone, back to you on closing remarks. As we've discussed today, we've seen a lot of cross-cutting issues being discussed, whether it's housing, jobs, welfare reform, immigration reform. And we thank you for your leadership on being able to hold this at both a national level and also be sensitive to very local communities that are struggling right now. And you're very aware of Asian Pacific Islander communities in San Francisco, spanning from South to Market to the Tenderloin to Chinatown. And just would love for you to end us on a strong note today.
Well, thank you for your and again, what that means in terms of equity, because that is the word, that is the values word, that is the fairness word, that is what we should all be striving to, whether it's equity in access to health care, affordable housing, whether it's equity in terms of the workplace, it has equity in terms of environmental justice, almost every subject that you can name. There has been some injustice that needs to be corrected. And under this president, I think we will see transformational because it will be predicated on equity, not trickle down. We'll do it for these and then about starting with equity and letting that bubble up. Where we have been successful, and Gord knows this and Annie, and is where we have worked together on these issues. Not that I come back and say, well, this is what we've cooked up. No, what you tell me and I take back. And now, of course, we have more diversity in the Congress. So that's a blessing, because when we have a Grace Meng, young mom with little boys that she brings to the floor. I mean, it's a beautiful sight to see. Doris Matsui, Tammy Duckworth, two little babies born in Congress. So for us, it's frankly, it's all about the children, all of America's children, and equity for all of America's families. Whether it's, I always say it's about the children, their health, their education, the economic security of their families. For three that are addressed in the rescue package, going further to safe environment in which they can thrive. We passed the gun bill. In the president's infrastructure bill, it's about clean air, clean water, no lead, that kind of thing. So safe for the children. And then a world at peace in which they can reach their fulfillment. We learn a lot about all of those things. So know your power in this discussion, because it's not for us to assume anything. It's for us to know where you think a difference will be made. And we've had some nice successes over time with some housing projects and what we've tried to do in all of the subjects I named, health, education, et cetera. But more needs to be done. And there is an opportunity now with this president. This president is a unifier, do it in a unifying way. So the challenge we have now is to have people take a step beyond these hate crimes and really call upon our Republican colleagues. I don't even mean this in a partisan way, except it's necessary for them to shed some of the things they said in the hearings last week. I hope you didn't see some of the things they said, and just take us to a place that if we're going to be proud to be Americans, we have to be proud of our AAPI community. And that is not with any condescension, but with the greatest respect and pride that we take. So let's stay in close touch on all of the things we talked about here and beyond. Again, I feel very proud to represent San Francisco. I brag about it all the time that when I go home and I go to Chinatown or I go to Japantown or I go wherever, and I think, oh, those poor souls, they don't have a district like this. How boring like that must that be? You know, how uninspiring must that be? Don't tell them I said that, but I do tell them anyway. In any case, thank you all very much. Let's just make some measures of our success, whether it's about how we inform the public, our children, about this part of our country, whether it's about how we expand our housing, whether it's about all of the issues that we talked about, when we meet in May, let's see what differences we have made even in a matter of 6-8 weeks, okay? And then what our goals are beyond that. By then, we'll be on our way with our infrastructure package. It won't be passed yet, but we'll be marking it up in committee. And your voices will be important to hear at that time. Thank you, Gordon. Thank
Thank you, Nancy.
you. Getting your picture.
Everybody now, real quick. We love you, Nancy, okay? We love you, Nancy.
Love you, Nancy.
Nancy.